Good afternoon, everybody, from the C45 community, Quality Association community. My name is Brigitte Simons, and I'm a board of director on the C45 committee. And it's with great delight that I am your host today for the webinar that is hosted by Isolocity, setting the standards for quality record keeping through lean principles. And what truly excited me to invite these subject matter experts to come and speak today was from my own perspective of running a licensed cultivator and processor. And in our third year, stability of operations to me was really digitally transforming our record keeping system and process control amongst many, many key employees. And my team at Safari Flower Company, we did in fact evaluate several of the electronic QMS systems that are today available to serve the cannabis record keeping requirements. And to me, in our evaluation criteria, this team and Isolocity's platform was really of tremendous value, very progressive, and to me was a key figure in reducing costs related to manual processes. So I would like to introduce our webinar speakers today. First is Chris Budd, who is our essentially subject matter expert for Isolocity, who runs their sales and probably lots of their communication and strategies group. Chris is truly a subject matter expert in ISO and GMP compliance and is a key architect behind the Isolocity platform as it pertains to cannabis. Also with this is Maria Lamb. She is the Director of Communications for Isolocity, and she has played a pivotal role in expanding the company's brand awareness through more vertical integrated industries related to cannabis. And she will be speaking most on the presentation today. And then last but not least is Emily Soares, who is an operations coordinator and one of the lead trainers of the Isolocity platform, who helps clients ensure that their onboarding and interface requirements meet the needs of their business. So with further ado, ladies and Chris, please take it away.
Thank you very much for those great introductions. Very much appreciated it. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, where you are in this wonderful world that we live in today. My name is Chris Budd, and we're looking forward to going through this presentation, revealing how lean record keeping principles can help improve your company's operations. So before we get into that, I just want to identify and introduce a little bit about who we are in Isolocity. Isolocity is a quality management system software designed to streamline the record-keeping requirements for ISO and GMP requirements. Isolocity has clients throughout the world on every continent, and we are primarily focused on reducing the labor involved in record-keeping and streamlining those processes. The next little bit, Maria Lamb will be going through the agenda and introducing our subject for the day, and then from there, I'll be taking over for a little bit, and then Emily will then bring it home. Maria, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. So for today's agenda, we've outlined a couple of introductory topics, the first of which is the current state of compliance in the cannabis industry. Then we'll go into a little bit about the lean principles and how they can help solve the existing issues in record keeping, before focusing on the main topics of the day, which are the 7 forms of waste, examples of where you can find them in your process, as well as some methodology that you can use to mitigate them. We'll summarize the key takeaways before heading into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So before we begin, I'd like to make a note here for everyone that to try your best to keep your questions to the very end, and we'll try and discuss them during the Q&A session. And without further ado, let's take a look at the current state of compliance in cannabis. So before we go into detail on, what lean principles are, I think it's really important for us to just take a look at what's happening now in the cannabis industry. From our research with industry operators, we've been able to highlight two key areas of opportunities: inefficient operational design, as well as the usage of systems that manage record keeping in an ineffective way. These both stem from a lack of standardization that can be seen industry-wide. These can all ultimately lead to longer and more difficult audits as well as recalls. Obviously, these are detrimental to the profitability and the growth of companies while making it harder to replicate success. So, with that knowledge in mind, as well as our experience helping customers with the similar issues, we believe that the clear answer to all of these questions or these issues is to develop more standardization industry-wide. And one of the best ways to do that is with lean principles. So, what are lean principles? Lean is a way of thinking, and sorry about that. Lean is made up of two main principles. That is the way of thinking as well as lean practice. Lean as a way of thinking is about creating a desired value with fewer resources and less wastage. Lean thinking always begins with the customer and the customer's perspective. What does the customer value most, or what is the problem that the customer is trying to solve? And by doing that, it leads us to lean practice. Lean practice begins with the work and the actions that directly and indirectly create value for the customer, as well as the people doing the work. It consists of ongoing experimentation, which ultimately should lead to innovations. Whether it is through knowledge or physical work, the end goal is to increase quality while creating better workflows. Lean thinking and practice must happen simultaneously. A successful lean enterprise must continue to understand the customer, their needs, and what value they can bring to them while figuring out better ways to provide it. This can, of course, be done through the product itself or through the process of development. It should occur at every single stage of the product's life cycle and should include research and development up until disposal. So, why lean principles, you might ask? Well, this is because lean principles focus on what is essential to the business. They help optimize the foundations of production and record-keeping capabilities that can make it so that profitability can be achieved much quicker. Teams can also obtain methodology that ensures operational sustainability. They'll use up less energy and resources to produce desired outcomes, in addition to reducing operational risks. Which brings us to the main topic of today, which are the 7 forms of waste. So the reason why we chose the 7 forms of waste is because we think that this is a really great jumping off point for teams, and it'll allow you to basically highlight different opportunities in your current process and either save time or reduce costs organization-wide. So this is actually the perfect point for us to hand over the presentation to Chris, and he'll talk to everyone a little bit more about motion waste. Cool. Looks like your mic is...
I am on mute. Perfect. Not anymore. Thank you, guys. So in speaking about our first form of waste, which is motion, this is fairly self-explanatory. Wasteful motion is all the motion, whether by a person, machine, that can be minimized. If excess motion is used to add value that could have been added by less, then that margin of motion is obviously wasted. Motion can refer to anything from a worker bending over to picking something up on the floor to additional wear and tear on assets, thus resulting in capital depreciation that must be eventually replaced sooner than later. So why is this an issue? There are many environmental costs from excess motion, obviously. The obvious one is the needless waste of materials used to replace worn machinery. Another one could be linked to health concerns for overburdened employees. So some examples of motion waste in a cannabis facility. This all stems from having a poor facility layout, by not having machine terminals located throughout the building. So these are companies that have only machine terminals that are located in the office, which leads to batching of data input. Having lots of binders full of paperwork as well too, where paper is being filed in one location. Also making manual calculations of inventory or percentages consumed by recipes. These numbers can be automatically updated in real time through IoT devices and other smart applications. So a lot of manual entry, a lot of manual work, a lot of movement. So some solutions we're going to talk about today to reduce motion waste. And what I want to do is help this group understand what is one-piece flow. So in order to do so, what I would like every single one of you to do after this presentation is go to one of your colleagues. Each one of you grab 10 pieces of paper and 10 envelopes. And what I want one person to do is to enact one-piece flow. So that one individual is going to fold this piece of paper 3 times and insert it in the envelope and close the envelope. Then the second person is going to enact batch flow. And this person is going to take each piece of paper, they're going to fold it once, then they're going to pick that pile up again and fold it twice, 10 times, and they'll pick the pile up again and fold it the 3rd time. Then they'll insert it into the envelope, and then they'll pick the envelopes up and then close them. So this batch process compared to the one-piece flow, you'll notice that the person who's enacting the one-piece flow, which is the fold 3 times, insert and close, will actually finish this exercise 30 to 40% faster than the person who is using the batch flow. This same sort of methodology goes with your record-keeping process. So helping your employees understand that batch inputting of data is actually a less form of efficient manner when it comes to inputting your data. So by problem solving this is having increased locations for data entry. On top of that too, looking at utilizing 5S methodology for documentation and tool location. We have a great reference link at the end of this presentation that will help walk you through the benefits of 5S. For those who don't know what 5S is a lean principle that focuses on the sorting of a workplace, which essentially is throwing out all the waste, cleaning it up, which is through the straightening out. Then you want to shine it and standardize and sustain through audit protocols. And we have a great reading on this that you can later reference, but utilizing 5S as well to help optimize your workspace, which will lead to better one-piece flow inputs. Furthermore, utilizing integrations to reduce the double handling of data. This is an important element as well, because anytime you have to handle a piece of data that needs to end up in multiple locations, you only want to handle that data once. So ensuring that your systems are integrated in place to allow for only one input of the data. Okay. So the next form of waste we're going to talk about today is waiting. Waiting refers to the wasted time because of a slowed or halted production in one step of the production chain while the previous step is completed. To take the classic example of the production line, if one task along this chain takes longer than another, then any time that employee in charge of the next task spends waiting is actually wasted time. The task that takes more time must be made more efficient. Other employees must be hired to help, or the workflow must be better coordinated or scheduled in order to make up for this wasted time. Why is this an issue? The environmental impacts come from the wasted labor and energy from lighting, heating, cooling during the waiting period. Additionally, records can be damaged or lost because of an inefficient workflow. Some examples of waiting waste. So poor operational design leads to product releases and record keeping to take longer than it should. Poor system management that creates the double handling of data when information can be readily available automatically. Waiting on batch record completion prior to product release. These are some examples of waiting waste. So Some solutions to reconcile this, a simple one, but one that's not often reviewed, is cross-training. So cross-training ensures the process is not dependent on one person and that you can have multiple people who are deemed qualified and competent to carry out a particular process. So if someone's not in the office or someone's not available to complete the record or the process, you have someone else next in line who can take this on. Furthermore, utilizing better visual management. So visual management in the form of visual KPIs, tick charts, work instructions, and SOPs available at the point of use. These ensure there is no confusion with the instructions and allows teams to process the data more efficiently. This will also increase input quality while decreasing waiting time between stages and escalation of tasks. The next form of waste we'll be discussing today is transportation waste. Transportation waste refers to the movement of materials or records from one position to another. The transport itself adds absolutely no value, so minimizing these costs is absolutely essential. This means having one plant closer to another in the production chain or minimizing the cost of transportation used to a more efficient method. Resources and time are used to handling materials, employing staff, and operating transportation, training, implementation, safety precautions, and using extra space. Transport can also cause the waste of waiting, as one part of the production chain must wait for materials or records to arrive. Why is this an issue? Well, ultimately, there's the environmental cost of transportation, which includes emissions, packaging, damage, or misplacing of the product or records, as well as a whole host of other wastes that go along with the transportation. Some examples of transportation waste, obviously, are the gas emissions or personal cost of having to work at a facility to complete a particular task, traveling paper documents such as lab results or batch records, as well as the time cost of collecting quantitative and qualitative plant product data that is unnecessary and prone to human error. The solutions that are very simple but seldom overlooked, having automated data inputs with sensors, integrations, and IoT devices. So we're not going to fetch that data comes to us. Furthermore, use secure electronic systems that allow employees to work remotely. And by doing so as well, implementing a system in place that has validated e-signature methodology to improve documentation approvals. So we're not signing off on paper documents. This is happening in an electronic system. So we're not chasing paper around as well, and things can be done remotely. Very simple solutions to reduce transportation waste. Inventory waste. Inventory waste refers to the waste produced by unprocessed inventory. This includes the waste of storage, the waste of capital tied up in unprocessed inventory, the waste of transporting the inventory, and containers used to hold the inventory. The lighting of the storage space, etc. These are all part of the waste chain that is created with excess inventory, with records as well too. The environmental impacts of inventory waste are packaging, deterioration, or damage to the work in process, additional materials to replace the damage, or obsolete inventory. And the energy and light, as well as either the heat or the cooling of the inventory space. These are all adding to the waste profile of extra inventory. So some examples of inventory waste: duplication of records leading to unnecessary errors, and a finding exercise to locate this information as well during audits. So we think about those big binders and file folders that we have. That is all excess inventory waste. Manual inputs of data or other information which take time to process for digital warehousing. This takes up space and time while amplifying the security risks of your records. And furthermore, we all know it, we all do it, unnecessary emails. Unnecessary emails are all part of excess waste. We can reduce unnecessary emails. That's an important element. So some solutions worth considering: prioritizing sustainability by using less paper and less materials, which reduces the cost of data warehousing and reduces the risk of lost data in the long run. Furthermore, standardizing and reducing the points of inputs to create a system for one input that feeds multiple endpoints. So when you think about your batch record keeping, you know you're handling a piece of information multiple times in multiple records. So you want to think about creating a system where you input that information once and it ends up in different parts of your batch record. Thus, enacting this will improve automation for record keeping and will reduce the amount of inventory of records you have on hand. Furthermore, adopting a streamlined communication tool that lines up with your record keeping. And so it keeps you off the email. You're in the record, you're working on something, communicate in the record and not communicating outside of the record via email, thus reducing the inventory of information and not creating those unnecessary emails. At this point, I'd like to invite Emily to take it over and discuss the other points of waste.
Thank you, Chris. So the next point of waste is overproduction waste. So this is considered to be one of the most serious wastes. So overproduction can cause all other types of waste and result in excess inventory and record keeping. Stocking too much of a product that goes unused has obvious costs. So storage, wasted materials, and excessive capital tied up in a useless inventory are some examples. So why is this an issue? So depending, of course, on the product in question, overproduction can have very serious environmental effects. So more raw materials than necessary are consumed. The product may spoil or become obsolete, which requires it to be tossed. And then if the product does involve any hazardous material, there are more hazardous materials than necessary wasted, resulting in extra emissions, extra costs of waste disposal, possible worker exposure, and potential environmental problems resulting from the waste itself. So what are some examples of overproduction waste? Some examples include mistakes in processing raw materials and data due to human error. This can cause an excess of resources to be used up and limit the production output while driving the cost up. Another example is producing too much paperwork for one process. So what are some solutions for overproduction waste? The first one would be the standardization of data handling and input requirements. Good documentation practices is another solution. And lastly, value stream mapping your data flow. So here you would map out your entire process from start to finish. It will allow you to see the big picture and determine how you can consolidate and streamline your process. So the next form of waste is overprocessing waste. Overprocessing refers to any component of the process of manufacture that is unnecessary. So for example, painting an area that will never be seen or adding features that will not be used. Essentially, it refers to adding more value than the customer requires. So why is this an issue? The environmental impact involves the excess of parts, labor, and raw materials consumed in production. Time, energy, and emissions are wasted when they are used to produce something that is unnecessary in a product. So simplification and efficiency will reduce these wastes and benefit the company and the environment. So what are some examples of overprocessing waste? Multiple prints of the same document in circulation due to fragmented training or onboarding systems, excess paper as a result of duplication in testing, approvals, training, etc., increased data handling efforts due to excess raw material, parts, and other records being processed, and too many steps to complete simple tasks, so employee training and SOP revisions. So what are some solutions for overprocessing? So the first one would be reducing waste involved with document revisions by standardizing training procedures for employees and onboarding processes. So for example, finding a system where training and documentation can happen all in one place reduces additional steps that can lead to overprocessing waste. Another solution would be introducing employee training portals or cloud-based systems to ensure a single source of truth as a new revision when it's added and approved for circulation. And lastly, automating through electronic systems to allow for pre-programmed and systemic responses for each step of document processing. So our last form of waste is defect waste. Defect refers to a product or record deviating from the standards of its design or from the customer's expectations. So defective products must be replaced. So they require paperwork and human labor to do so, and they could potentially lead to a loss in customers as well. So the resources put into the defective product are wasted because the product is not used. Moreover, a defective product implies waste at other levels that may have led to the defect to begin with. So making a more efficient system reduces these defects and increases the resources needed to address them in the first place. So why is it an issue? Environmental costs of defects are the raw materials consumed, the defective parts of the product requiring disposal or recycling, which wastes other resources involved in repurposing it, and the extra space required and increased energy used in dealing with the defects. So some defect waste examples. So when certain steps of an inspection are missed, this could lead to contaminants entering the supply chain, which would ultimately lead to your product waste, or recalls. And another example would be poor documentation practices or form design. So what are some solutions for defect waste? The first one would be to standardize your data input requirements. So this could be through good documentation practices and good record keeping. So you want to ensure that your form design prompts the user for what you want to see them complete. So the layout for your data inputs in relation to where work is being completed should also be considered in your form design. Some other solutions include error-proof input requirements through your form design again, and automated inputs, so sensors, equipment, and integrations. Poke-yoke release requirements to ensure no steps have been missed as well. So poke-yoke helps to ensure that there are no defects being released with your products. So it's a way to error-proof your release through verification checks and balances. And lastly, you can manage your risk through the use of analytics and reporting to drive preventative actions. So what are our key takeaways from the presentation today? So ways to eliminate waste include one-piece flow data input, the 5S exercise, integrations with technologies and various different systems, increase data input centers where possible, SaaS or cloud-based solutions allowing for remote work, good documentation practices and good record keeping practices, poke-yoke for your process, visual management, data integrity. And the main takeaway is being the more automation that you can implement into your production process, the better and less waste there will be with it. You're on mute still, Maria.
All right, thanks, Emily. That brings us to the end of the presentation portion of the webinar today. We'd like to once again thank you everyone for signing up. This is where I would love to have the questions kind of like be read to us, and then we can help hopefully answer them for you guys. And of course, if anyone is leaving right now, we'd like to kind of point out some upcoming events that we will also be at: the Growing Summit lift in May, and we do have the resources linked inside of this presentation as well, which we will be sharing after the webinar. So hopefully we can help you guys end this discussion with the answers to your questions.
Superb. I really enjoyed the thoughtfulness over how we would assume something that we did was efficient really could have underlying themes to be either more efficient or reducing travel waste. That was a kind of a take home for me. I guess I would like to kick off our Q&A with a chat about metrics, especially on the hardest point in the cannabis industry, which is inventory waste. Maybe I can frame it with some context. So the inventory packaging process in cannabis has numerous process steps to it, which of course are documented into batch records and then into release documentation. To look at waste of the process for release, what would be some typical measures, KPIs, or something that your team could suggest would be something to look at and to put in as measurement for the waste associated to either product release or batch records?
That's a great question. I'll take that one if you guys are okay with it. I would measure changeover. So the changeover time, and changeover time is one of those things that is not necessarily considered in the cannabis space. It's more focused on in high automation or high production runs. But if you think about a packaging process, you're packaging one strain, and then you got to go through the whole process of cleaning the room, changing it over to then package the next strain or product. So that is something that I think a lot of companies don't pay enough attention to. One of the biggest wastes out there when it comes from a capacity planning perspective that's not considered is changeover time. So we would encourage everyone to understand, firstly, what entails in changeover. And that's essentially the minute of that one packaging run is finished. And then you want to, from that minute to the next time you actually start packaging the next product or the next strain, that is your lost time. So figuring out how much time you're spending in changeover to reduce that time, to reduce your changeover time, so you're continually packaging product at a more efficient pace and getting it out the door. So that would be one thing I would definitely encourage, just high level to start looking at right now, is understanding what is the cost of changeover and how can you improve that process to make it a lot more efficient.
And then I would say that having software to essentially alert the clock. So packaging occurs, you then have somebody signing off that the run is complete. Then having another associate clock in electronically to a system, which then starts the clock for a turnover.
That's right.
And then marks the completion. And then perhaps, usually we have a verification of QA after a room is turned over to ensure that a sanitation team does what they're supposed to do. Yeah. So is effectively that measurement of waste electronically possible?
Absolutely. Yeah. You want to have a system that taps in with a stop clock, and even if you're not able to catch a stop clock type of system at that time, but just noting the timestamp for when you've started the changeover and when you ended it, and having that logged somewhere. And then looking at the critical path items that take place with changeover. So absolutely, having a system that allows for time management of the task in hand, so you're able to track that shift over shift, strain over strain. Maybe some strains are tougher than others to clean up for whatever reason or to change over. And so just having an understanding and be able to sort of see that regression of the data. Is it a particular day and time that changeovers are a little bit more expensive, a little bit longer? Is it the weekend shift? Is it the night shift? Is it in the morning? This is all part of why you want to capture that data. You want to trend that data and start looking at the trends of where changeover is a little bit less efficient and what you need to do to essentially improve the process by eliminating the waste. Right.
Yeah. Thank you. A couple questions coming in. I think we're going to motion to record controls.
Sure.
And so I'll just segue onto the same type of question because batch record review is definitely one of the core functions of a QA team, and that's the primary audience we're speaking with today. And then measuring waste in hands and time, reviewing cultivation records, then processing records, then all the way to packaging records. How would the electronic tools enable managers, QA managers, to then kind of see this waste in handling the records? Not so much doing all the steps that are documented in the records, but when the steps are allegedly complete, and now we're in the review period of those steps. So what would be your items of watch out for waste in handling of a batch record?
Right. And a great indicator would be if you had a system in place that, let's just call it a batch lookup tool, right? And you would identify, you're ready to release the product, and that batch lookup tool would identify where you still have records that are in process that should not be in process and should be complete and finalized. Or if you have something that's flagged as failed or an open deviation that has yet to be reconciled, these are all examples of waste in the process, because now you got to go back and you got to chase that record to be completed before you release. And right. Going back to one of the points we made a little bit earlier is creating a system that one input feeds multiple endpoints. If you're touching this data multiple times and you know it's going to go in different records, well, having a system in place where you know this one record is going to end up in different forms, and then having a system that can consolidate all of that data to create your master batch file and provide you with that summary of what's ready to go and what we're still waiting on. So a nice metric to understand waste from a batch at the end of the run, and the batch release, you're ready to go, and the QAP is ready to sign off on this, and they do their batch lookup and they see what records are still in process or not complete, is having a metric. So how many records are still outstanding at this point in the process? Are we finding that, for example, sanitation is usually still in process all the time? So we know we have a problem with sanitation. Sanitation's creating waste because we now need to go back and chase that record for it to be completed. So it could be something as simple as that. And even if at the end of the batch release and that lookup tool provides you with that visual cue on what's still outstanding, don't ignore it and issue it and trend it. So maybe raise a little nonconformance, just issue the nonconformance error code, batch release record, link it to sanitation. So now you get that trend analysis over time. So then you start seeing the metric of all the errors that are happening on batch release. So the team can come back during a management review process, maybe whether it be weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and look at the trends. Like on batch release, these are the issues that are coming up more often than none. How do we stop this from happening? Because this is how is it affecting us to get product out the door efficiently and safely, because we can't safely release it unless we know all the records are complete. And it also keeps you out of hot water with Health Canada or the FDA.
Or just the awareness of your soft spots. I mean,
Yeah.
like we're not perfect organizations of robots that, you know, I mean, just the self-awareness, honestly, is a big recognition value for the business, where you do have inadequacies or competencies that need some correction.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Question from the audience is now coming in about security clearance measures and authorizing users, I guess, for certain activities on touching records. Can a user profile, I guess, in the software enable a security clearance status profile? And can records be scrupulously adulterated if you don't have the right controls for different levels of clearance?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a great question. And you want to make sure if you're getting into a system where you have those controls in place. We've all heard of 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. That's a data integrity standard issued by the FDA that is also adopted up here in Canada. You want to make sure that you have a program in place that captures the audit logs of the database, who inputted what data where, why they inputted it, and when they inputted it. But more importantly as well, to ensure that only certain users have access to certain documents. So if an individual shouldn't be viewing an SOP that they have no business viewing, they do not have access to do so, or contribute to a record that they're not authorized or trained on to record on. So you want to ensure that if you're going to go an electronic route, that you pick a system that provides these controls in place in order for you to maintain control of your record keeping, and which is all falls into one of the points we made at the end, is ensuring that the data stays, the integrity of the data stays intact.
Yeah, and I would think that that can be associated with a user profile where the security clearance has to have a checked field, or has to actually have the security clearance letter embedded for that authorized user to have access controls of certain regions of the platform.
Yes, and it's set up it's in speaking of our platform, and I don't want to go into too much detail about our product, but how we capture that in Isolocity is that they're called authorized users. So the admin on site or the admin on file identifies authorized users for various records and various SOPs, for example. So it's controlled in that way. And if you're not authorized, you're not invited to the party, essentially.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. We're going to move to the topic of recalls, which is one of the greatest value propositions of why you'd want electronic record keeping. Could you perhaps speak to your experiences in helping clients with recalls And maybe you could even context it from the frame of communication, the communication requirements one would have to do in activating a recall.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so one of the things with recalls that I would say a lot of companies don't do well with, obviously getting the product off the shelves is the most important part of the recall. And I think once you're in that mode, you'll do anything you have to do to ensure that that happens. And then of course, fill out your form or your documentation, or whether it was driven from a customer complaint, that all seems to happen. But what we find is that it's the post-mortem that doesn't happen. And it's, okay, the root cause analysis, right? And we find that there's a lot of companies that don't want to understand why that actually happened. And unless you're using an electronic system that's going to prompt you to go through that analysis and go through that review, that allows you to trend out the customer complaints, that allows you to identify the sources or the error codes of those complaints from the strains or from the particular room or workflow that adulterated the product, then you're never really going to get on top of your systems. And it doesn't matter if you're growing cannabis or extracting cannabis or engaging in a pre-roll operation. These are all processes that have systems. And if the system is failing, that's allowing you to release product that then needs to be recalled, there's something wrong with the system. And that's why systemic root cause analysis is very rarely done post recall. Once companies get through the recall, they get the stuff off the shelves and they're just thinking about how do we get more stuff out into the marketplace. There's very little post-mortem. So we would encourage companies to understand that their company, their cannabis operation, doesn't matter if they're pre-rolling or growing or even selling in a retail location. It's just one big system. And once something fails, something's gone wrong with the system, and it's not the human fault, it's the system's fault for not preventing the human from making that mistake. So systemic root cause analysis is a big failure when it comes to recalls.
Yeah, I think to add on to that too, right? It's just like the whole process of a corrective and preventative action that should stem from why the recall exists, right? So you have to create a corrective action in order to figure out what happened and do the root cause analysis, and then create a preventive action in order to prevent new recalls from happening that may stem from the same error.
Right. And now practical down to some tools, I guess, to help manage recall, which would start with audit trail on how the record was handled, the procurement record handling, how it was procured, especially since sometimes you're a part of a recall, but you're not the final seller, or the consumer, the B2C consumer seller.
Right.
And then lastly, who has to be part of your recall team based on the auditing of records?
Right.
So practically speaking, audit trail can be generated, and then maybe just paint a picture for us on, practically speaking, how fast can we get action, I guess, from audit trailing?
It needs to be immediate. So unless you need to have a system that's linked up with full traceability, that gives you an immediate report out on what's happened. This isn't something that needs to be, it can't be a phishing exercise, because that just creates more waste. It's got to be immediately provided this information. Now, the second part of that question, sorry, remind me, what was the second part of that question? There was
well, you spoke to how fast you get the tools out, the audit out. And then you're crossing your recall concept across procurement records.
Yes.
Right? Obviously the quality records within the batch, and then how to communicate to the parties that are implicated, because there are times where we are not necessarily the final seller. So it might be we're participating in a recall that was initiated by another party.
Yeah. And,
right.
And that,
so it's the communication piece and piecing everybody's tool sets together.
And that's why it's important to have a cross-functional team involved in the recall analysis. It's one of those things that a lot of companies don't do well, is involving a cross-functional group of individuals. Everyone seems to think that, okay, it's a quality problem, let the quality people figure it out. Well, wait a minute, the quality people didn't sell it, the quality people didn't buy it,
Or transport it.
Or process it, right? So there is multiple facets of the organization that need to be involved in this, what we want to call systemic root cause analysis or review of the recall, to ensure that every area of the value stream has been touched in the analysis and the communication is strong to get it out to the marketplace with vendors or with customers or suppliers, to ensure that everyone is aware, because obviously if it's a supplier issue, then your purchasing person needs to be involved in that as well. If it's a machine issue, then you're talking about your processing individuals and how have you maintained that machine? Are you keeping up on your maintenance? Are you doing your calibration? Maybe it's not reading correctly. So there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. And so understanding, for those who a lot of people in this room are going to understand what fishbone root cause analysis is, but that's taking that fishbone approach to your problem solving and looking at all the different facets of an organization and how it has all contributed to this one problem. So it's not just that 5 why deep dive analysis, but also looking at a fishbone analysis and understanding the different areas of the company and its processes and how it's all resulted to this issue. And that's more difficult to do in a manual system. This is why it's important to have an automated system that provides the report out for you in a timely manner with good data.
Yeah, superb. Okay, I would like to invite our audience to speak if they would love to, either by posing a question in the chat or by raising your hand. And if I haven't been able to unmute you, I'm happy to do so. You can ask live. Just give people a moment here to
We had a pretty good turnout today.
This was fantastic. It's because the topic on efficiencies in QA are likely what everybody's 2022 strategies are. You're right, people love the topic. I would think that, just to follow up on the recall last comment, is that somebody like Emily, somebody like the experts at Isolocity would help on the mock recall concept, because it's scary, it's forced that it is practiced. And I know personally from leading our business at Safari that we do choose what clients, what transactions are going to be the ones of subject of a mock recall. So this would be something your team would help with on the platform.
Yes, our platform, we can build out customized workflows in our platform that will help you measure the effectiveness of your mock recall. And as you know, most companies should be performing a mock recall at least once a year for each product type, whether it be an edible, a topical, a pre-roll, extraction, doesn't matter. Every different type of product in your organization should go through a mock recall.
Yeah. Okay. Since this is kind of at top of my mind, and maybe the questions will come on this, which are transparency and records between transactioning parties, especially in kind of this new wave trend, which will send Canadian products internationally, and kind of the value of having due diligence in a solid software system rather than procuring product with an overseas agent or an overseas business where you would be extremely manually in record keeping, and at any point records may need to be shown, all the way from seed material use, the uses of materials, and then of course the final release paperwork. What tips and tools would you give our audience today who are thinking about more international transactions and kind of the value of the records from seed all the way to product release being electronically stored, electronically managed?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things there. Firstly, having electronic records, they're easier to transmit, right? You're not scanning records and sending them over to the overseas buyers. It's a simple email package that can be securely delivered. But ultimately as well too, if you're going to go down the electronic record keeping process, it's important that you pick a solution that is vetted by a third party. So it's important that if you're selling into foreign markets, these foreign markets have record keeping requirements. The EU have their own record keeping requirements. Canada, as we know, has a very sophisticated record keeping requirement. But these record keeping requirements also have data integrity protocols built around them. And these data integrity protocols are mandated for electronic systems to follow. So it's important to ensure that the electronic system you pick is actually compliant to the market you're exporting your product to. So when those records are delivered with the product, that the auditor or the buyer who is receiving that product and the records knows that these records follow the protocols that are prescribed in their jurisdiction. So those couple things. So it's kind of like you wouldn't buy from a supplier unless they were vetted. So make sure that the software company has also been vetted, but also vetted by a third party who's qualified to do the vetting.
Great. All right, I'm going to try to unmute people. Please, anybody have a question they want to voice live or post it in the chat? We have some time to answer, and I'm sure we would love to hear your thoughts on the topic. What is the meaning of OEE? Just came in.
Yeah, great question. Overall equipment efficiency. So that is understanding how efficient your equipment actually is. So it's all based on what you should be producing, minusing what you have wasted, minusing what you have actually produced. So the efficiency of your equipment. So let's say if you should build out 10 products per hour, but on average, you're only building out 8.5 good products minus any sort of changeover or defective product, for example, then your overall equipment efficiency is at 85%. So it's a good metric for extraction companies, to actually measure is their OEE. This is a very good metric, very applicable for what they do. And I bet a lot of them hasn't even considered it. And this is just another lean principle to further understand your capability of your run rate and how much you should be producing compared to what you're actually producing. And this all comes into changeover as well. So reducing changeover time, reducing waste, reducing defective product, reducing all these elements increases your OEE and makes you a more efficient and effective company at producing product.
So our audience would like to know how they can get a copy of the presentation. And like we were discussing before we began, what we will do is enable your team to send it out to our attendees list. Either you want the spam in your inbox or you don't. But I believe with the email address, do you guys have an email address? Somebody could get in touch with you guys if they want to ask a specific question after, or maybe even just post it to the chat. And we can make sure that the PowerPoint deck can get to you specifically.
Okay, well, just absolutely. And I think we're also going to be posting this presentation on our website as well too. So if you missed it, we'll be happy to send out the presentation, but we'll also have it on our website for further reference.
Okay, excellent. All right, another question came in. Okay, so when a company like Cookies based out of San Francisco comes out and sells their flowers and pre-rolls in Canada, do they grow their flower and pre-rolls in Canada? Do they grow their flowers here, or do they ship out from the United States? I guess it's a question on if you're a brand in Canada, do you have to grow in Canada? Because that's where the genesis of that. I don't know, do you guys have any insights? Maybe I could stab at it.
Yeah, I think that's a better question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Traditionally, brands sold in Canada means that they have a producer that is either linked with a brand production or co-sell agreement, and where they actually manufacture cannabis-containing products in Canada. So a lot of the relay of Canadian versus California products are likely you just have two businesses in a joint venture, and those products are produced in the state or in the country that they're sold in. I think this was a big momentum last year, where lots of California brands were thinking about their entry into Canada, and of course Canadian brands trying to get their products into California. I think classically the easiest way of doing this is that you set up production facilities in both locations, and then you become brand licensees, and away you go. It's still very difficult to get raw materials cross-border for the cost and the time that's associated with that. I do think that setting up co-manufacturing is likely the fastest way to recognize brands in multiple countries. All right. Well, guys, maybe I leave you with one last summary statement. Maybe talk a little bit about how they can get in touch with you through your email that I just posted through the chat, and maybe just one last voice of wisdom from each of you to finish off today's webinar.
Sure.
Why don't, Chris, you start?
Sure. Less is more. That's it. Less is more.
Clean and simple. Great. Maria, yeah, from your perspective.
I think that, like, the topic of today is like standardization and using lean methodology overall, right? Like what Chris said, using less is always better than more.
Yeah, and it wouldn't matter what manufacturing sector you're in, exactly. Understanding those principles, it allows you to pivot and be agile, I think, as a quality professional. Absolutely. And then Emily, from your perspective, your words of wisdom.
Yeah, to add to that, I would just say be open to improving your processes and making things more efficient, and don't be hesitant to change what's already been in place when there's improvements available.
I think that one is a great takeaway. We're coming into a time where cannabis operations have really now looked at the cost of operating and cost controls that many businesses will put onto teams, and the cost of change will be of debate. However, the end result can be more profitable than maybe little baby steps of change that would require some cost to change. Right, with supply chain increasing for cannabis, regulatory fees becoming more aware, I think changes to waste is a good view of 2022 for operations. Mm-hmm. So with that, I thank you so much for your time putting this great presentation together. I thank the C45 Quality Association community for giving us their time this hour to watch. And if you have any questions regarding today's presentation, Isolocity's email is in the chat. It's just hello@isolocity.com. And of course, always you are free to reach out to a C45 board member if you have suggestions on further content that you would like to see in some webinar series in 2022. And with that, thank you very much, and we'll close out today's session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.